My name is Eloise Montgomery. I am 78 years old now, and I live alone in a small town in Missouri where the summers are hot and the winters chill you to your bones. Most days, I sit on my creaky front porch, wrapped in a quilt that smells faintly of lavender and memories, watching the sun dip behind the old oaks. It's a quiet life, slower than the one I had when I was young, a life full of dreams, secrets, and pain. I want to tell you my story, the story I kept locked away in my heart for over 6 decades. It's a story of betrayal by the people I loved most, of silence and shame, but also of survival and the faint, stubborn glow of hope. I was born in 1947 in Springfield, Missouri, the youngest of 3 children. My father, Henry, was a mechanic who worked long hours fixing cars, always coming home smelling of grease and oil. My mother, Gladys, stayed home most days, keeping house and raising us. Our life was simple, maybe even ordinary. We lived in a small white house with peeling paint, surrounded by a patchy garden my mother tried to keep alive. From the outside, we looked like any other family on the block, happy, quiet, respectable. But behind closed doors, darkness lurked, a darkness that would change everything for me and my mother. That darkness had a name, James. My Uncle James, my mother's brother. Growing up, Uncle James was a shadow in the background, someone I barely saw but always heard about. He was charming when he wanted to be, with his easy smile and sharp eyes. But there was something about him that never felt right to me, even as a child. I couldn't put my finger on it, but my gut twisted whenever he was near. The first time he touched me, I was just 14 years old. It was a warm summer evening, and I was sitting alone on the back porch swing, watching the fireflies flicker through the yard. My parents were at the town fair, leaving me behind with a simple promise to be home soon. Uncle James came over carrying a glass of lemonade, his grin too wide, his eyes lingering too long. He sat next to me on the swing and started talking in a low voice, telling me stories about the old days, about how he used to play in these same fields as a boy. I remember feeling a strange mix of comfort and unease. Then, without warning, he reached over and touched my hand. I pulled away, but he grabbed me tighter. I froze, terrified and confused. That night, something inside me cracked. I didn't know how to explain what happened, not to myself, and certainly not to anyone else. When I finally told my mother, hoping for comfort, hoping she would protect me, I was met with coldness instead. "You deserved it," she said, her voice steady and hard. "You shouldn't have been there alone." Her words felt like knives stabbing into my chest. The woman who was supposed to love me, to shield me, was blaming me. After that, the house felt like a prison. I became invisible, a ghost wandering the halls. I stopped talking at school, stopped answering when friends called. I buried my pain deep inside, trying to pretend nothing had happened, but every night I cried myself to sleep. My mother and I drifted apart. She retreated into herself, and James became a permanent, silent presence in the background, always watching, always waiting. For months, I lived in a fog of fear and shame. My grades fell, and my teachers noticed but never asked. My friends stopped inviting me out, and I stopped caring if they did. The worst moments were when I was alone. The silence screamed louder than anything. I felt like I was drowning in a sea of hopelessness. One night, after a particularly brutal argument with my mother, I found myself standing on the roof of the old barn behind our house. The moon was full, casting an eerie glow over the fields. I held a rope in my trembling hands, ready to end the pain forever. I remember the cold wind biting at my skin, the rough texture of the shingles beneath my bare feet. I looked out at the world, a world that felt like it had turned its back on me. I was ready to let go. But then, a soft voice called out from below. "Eloise, come down, honey." It was Grandma Matilda, my mother's mother. She had always been a quiet woman, wise and gentle. She climbed up beside me, wrapped her arms around me, and held me as if I were the most precious thing in the world. She told me I was not alone. That no matter what had happened, I was worthy of love and happiness. That night changed everything. Grandma Matilda became my secret guardian angel. She listened when no one else would. She believed me when everyone else turned away. Slowly, I began to fight back against the silence that had nearly swallowed me whole. I started to write down my story, pouring my pain onto paper. It was hard, every word felt like ripping open a wound, but it was also freeing. But the scars ran deep. My relationship with my mother never healed. She never apologized. Instead, she buried the truth so far down that it almost seemed like it never happened. Years passed. I got married young, hoping love would fix the broken parts of me. But the shadows of my past followed me, haunting every moment. My husband, Walter, was kind but distant. I could never fully open up to him. I was afraid he would see the broken girl I tried so hard to hide. When we had children, 2 beautiful girls, I wanted to protect them from the darkness that had claimed me. I promised myself I would never let anything like that happen to them. But the past has a way of creeping back, no matter how tightly you hold on to hope. Now, sitting here in my small Missouri home, I realize the journey I've traveled, from that frightened girl on the porch swing to the grandmother I am today, is filled with pain and resilience, shame and strength. I'm telling you this because silence is a prison. And freedom begins when we speak our truth. If my story can reach even one person feeling lost, broken, or alone, to let them know they are not to blame and that there is hope, then it's worth every tear, every heartbreak. This is just the beginning of what happened to me, the darkness and the light that followed. The days after that night on the barn roof passed in a blur, but Grandma Matilda's words stayed with me like a lifeline. She didn't just save me from falling off the edge that night, she saved me from falling into a lifetime of silence and shame. I started to lean on her, even though I was scared to show my pain to anyone else. Grandma was a small woman with silver hair always pulled back in a tight bun, and eyes that saw right through you. She didn't judge or ask a million questions. Instead, she listened. And for a girl who had been silenced for so long, that was the kindest thing anyone had done. She helped me understand that what had happened was not my fault. That no matter what my mother said, I didn't deserve it, no child ever does. But it wasn't easy to believe those words, not at first. Shame was like a heavy coat I couldn't take off. My mother, Gladys, was a different story. After I told her about my uncle, after the way she had blamed me, the distance between us grew into a chasm. She wouldn't look me in the eye anymore. She stopped coming to my school plays and rarely answered my letters home when I moved away for college. I think she was ashamed, too. But instead of facing the pain, she chose to bury it deep beneath layers of denial and anger. It hurt more than I could say, losing my mother's love when I needed it most. Despite everything, I tried to hold on to hope. I wanted a future where I could be free from the past, free from the pain that haunted me every day. That's why I left home as soon as I graduated high school, moving to a small town in Kansas to study nursing. I wanted to help people. Maybe, in some way, that would heal me. College was both a blessing and a curse. The new environment gave me a chance to reinvent myself. No one knew my story there. I was just Eloise, the shy girl with the soft voice and a big heart. But inside, the scars still festered. I buried myself in my studies and long shifts at the hospital. I wanted to be useful, to be needed, anything to distract me from the memories that haunted me at night. It was during one of those long nights at the hospital that I met Walter. He was a quiet man, working as a paramedic on the night shift. We started talking over coffee breaks and soon, a friendship blossomed. Walter had his own scars, a childhood marked by loss and silence. We found comfort in each other's company, 2 broken souls trying to find light in the dark. Before long, we married. It was a simple ceremony in a small church, surrounded by a handful of friends and family. For a moment, I dared to believe that love could save me. But old wounds don't heal just because you say I do. I kept my past hidden, locked away like a secret too painful to share. And that silence created walls between us that grew thicker with every passing year. Walter was a good man, but he never knew how to break through those walls. Sometimes, I could see the confusion in his eyes, why I pulled away, why I flinched at certain touches, why I cried in silence. But I couldn't bring myself to tell him the truth. Our daughters, Emily and Sarah, were my pride and joy. I wanted to protect them from the shadows that had followed me for so long. I told myself I would be stronger for them, that I wouldn't let the darkness steal their childhoods like it had mine. But protecting them wasn't easy. Every time I saw signs of their growing pains, I worried the past would catch up with them. And I was terrified of repeating the cycle. Sometimes, when the house was quiet and they were asleep, I would sit alone in the living room, the weight of everything pressing down on me. The memories of Uncle James' betrayal, my mother's coldness, the silence that had swallowed me whole. In those moments, I wondered if I would ever be free. And then, one day, the past caught up with me in the most unexpected way. It was a late autumn afternoon when I received a phone call that shook me to my core. The voice on the other end was unfamiliar but urgent. It was the local sheriff from my hometown. "Mrs. Montgomery," he said, his voice grave. "We need to talk about your Uncle James." My heart stopped. I hadn't thought about James in years. I didn't want to think about him. But the past doesn't disappear, it waits, like a shadow lurking just out of sight. He told me that James had been arrested. Several women had come forward, accusing him of similar crimes, crimes that had destroyed families and lives. Hearing the news was like opening a wound I thought had healed. But at the same time, a small part of me felt relief. Justice might finally be coming. But the road ahead wasn't going to be easy. The past had to be faced, the silence broken, if I wanted to find peace. That night, I told Walter everything. The story I had buried for so long, the shame and fear I had carried alone. For the first time, I let myself be vulnerable. Walter held me as I cried, and I felt something I hadn't felt in years, hope. Maybe, just maybe, I could finally start to heal. But healing isn't a straight path. It's filled with twists, turns, and moments when the past threatens to drag you back into the darkness. I don't know yet what comes next. But I do know one thing, I am no longer alone. The days after the call from the sheriff felt like walking through a fog. I couldn't escape the whirlwind of memories and emotions that stormed through me. James, the man who had haunted my childhood, was finally facing the consequences of his actions, but the pain he caused still lived inside me. Walter was by my side, patient and kind, helping me carry the weight I'd borne alone for so long. But sharing my story didn't make the past easier to face, it only peeled back more layers of hurt. One afternoon, I sat alone in the quiet kitchen, the autumn sunlight filtering through the window. I thought about my mother, Gladys, the woman who had refused to protect me, who had told me I deserved it. The betrayal cut deeper than James's hands ever could. I wondered what had happened to her to make her turn away from me, to choose silence over love. Maybe she was broken too, trapped in her own web of shame and fear. But that didn't excuse the wounds she left on my heart. I picked up the phone and hesitated before dialing my sister's number. Emily had been my rock, my confidant through all these years, but even she didn't know everything. I wanted her to understand, really understand, what I had lived through. When she answered, her voice warm and curious, I felt a tear slip down my cheek. "Emily," I whispered, "there's something I need to tell you." We talked for hours that night. I told her about Uncle James, about my mother's silence, about the darkness that had nearly swallowed me whole. For the first time, I felt the weight lifting, shared with someone who loved me unconditionally. But as the days passed, I knew that healing would require more than just words. I needed to face the past head-on, to confront the pain and the people involved. That meant returning to Springfield, the place I had fled so many years ago, the place where my nightmare began. The thought terrified me. What would I find when I went back? Would the town still whisper about James? Would my mother even want to see me? Walter insisted he would come with me. "You don't have to do this alone," he said softly. His steady presence gave me courage I didn't know I had left. We packed our bags and drove the long road back to Missouri, the landscape rolling by like a reminder of all the years that had passed. When we arrived, I was overwhelmed by a flood of memories: the creak of the old porch swing, the smell of fresh-cut grass, the distant sound of church bells. The house was still there, weathered and worn, but standing stubborn against time. I knocked on the door, my heart pounding. My mother opened it, her face older and more fragile than I remembered. For a moment, we just stared at each other, two strangers bound by a shared past. She didn't speak. Neither did I. But the silence spoke volumes. Over the next few days, we walked through the shadows of our history together. Old wounds were reopened, tears were shed, and words we had left unsaid finally found a voice. It wasn't easy. Forgiveness didn't come quickly, and some things might never be healed. But in that small house, beneath the weight of years, a fragile thread of understanding began to form. I realized that pain can divide, but it can also connect us, if we are brave enough to face it. Returning to Springfield was like stepping into a time capsule of pain and memories I had long tried to forget. The small town looked much the same: the cracked sidewalks, the white picket fences, the old diner where I once shared milkshakes with my friends, but everything felt heavier, burdened by the secrets we all carried. My mother, Gladys, and I were no longer just mother and daughter. We were two wounded women, forced to confront a past that had tried to destroy us both. It was fragile and painful, but it was real. Our days were filled with silence and tears, with tentative conversations that felt like walking on glass. But it was in those moments, the quiet ones between words, that I realized healing doesn't come from forgetting. It comes from facing the truth, no matter how painful. One afternoon, while sorting through old photographs in the attic, I found a faded picture of my mother and Uncle James, smiling in a way that now felt hollow and eerie. I held it close, trying to understand how the man in that photo could cause so much destruction. Gladys sat nearby, her hands trembling as she held a worn letter from the past. It was addressed to James, written in her shaky handwriting. "I wanted to protect you," she whispered, "but I was scared. Scared of what would happen if I spoke up." Her confession hit me harder than I expected. For years, I had blamed her entirely, but now I saw her fear, the kind of fear that traps people in silence. That night, we shared a meal, the first real one since I arrived. We didn't talk much, but the act of breaking bread together felt like a small step toward mending what was broken. The next morning, I visited the local courthouse. James was scheduled for a hearing, and I knew I had to be there, to face the man who had taken so much from me and my family. Sitting in the cold courtroom, I watched as James entered, his face devoid of remorse. The prosecutor laid out the accusations, decades of abuse, silence, and betrayal finally coming to light. When it was my turn to speak, my voice shook, but I found strength in the truth. I told the court about the pain, the loneliness, and the long years of hiding. As I finished, a silence filled the room. I looked around and saw others, women who had suffered in silence, too. Together, our stories formed a chorus of courage. Leaving the courthouse, I felt lighter, as if a heavy chain had been broken. But I also knew this was just the beginning of my healing. Back at the house, my daughters Emily and Sarah arrived. Their hugs were warm and full of love. I realized then that despite everything, family could still be a source of strength. That evening, as we sat together, I felt a flicker of hope, a hope that no matter the past, the future could still hold light. The days after the courthouse hearing were some of the hardest I'd ever faced, but they were also some of the most freeing. I had spoken my truth in a place where silence had ruled for so long. For the first time, my pain wasn't just mine, it was shared. And somehow, sharing it made the unbearable feel a little lighter. But healing, I quickly learned, isn't a straight path. The past had dug its roots deep, and pulling them out meant confronting more than just memories. It meant facing people, emotions, and fears I'd avoided for decades. Walter stayed close, steady like a rock amidst the storm. He took care of the house, the girls, and most importantly, me. He listened without judgment, held my hand when I cried, and never asked me to be anything I wasn't ready to be. His quiet love was the balm I needed. Emily and Sarah came often, their eyes wide with empathy and sorrow. They'd read books with me about healing and trauma, and sometimes we'd just sit in silence, sharing space without words. I was proud of the women they were becoming, strong, compassionate, and fearless. I hoped my story would help them understand the importance of speaking up and standing tall. But even as I found strength in my family, old wounds reopened in unexpected ways. My relationship with my mother remained fragile, like thin ice over deep water. Some days, we spoke openly, others, the silence returned, thick and suffocating. One afternoon, Gladys called me. Her voice was soft, hesitant. "Eloise, I'm sorry," she whispered. "For everything." Those words caught me off guard. I had waited years for an apology, and now that it came, I didn't know how to respond. Part of me wanted to hold on to my anger, to protect myself from more hurt. But another part, the part Grandma Matilda nurtured in me, wanted to forgive. I told her, "I forgive you, Mom. But it will take time." That conversation opened a small door between us. It wouldn't erase the past, but it was a start. Around that time, I decided to join a support group for survivors of abuse. Sitting in a circle with strangers, each carrying their own scars, I found a sense of belonging I'd never known. We shared stories, tears, and laughter. We celebrated victories, no matter how small, and held each other through setbacks. One woman, Clara, became a close friend. She had survived similar trauma and was now an advocate, speaking out to raise awareness. Her courage inspired me to find my own voice beyond the walls of the support group. Together, we started volunteering at local shelters, helping women who were still trapped in cycles of abuse. It was painful work, but it gave my pain purpose. Through all this, the shadow of James lingered. His trial dragged on, stirring up memories I wished I could bury. But with each court date, the truth came closer to light. More women stepped forward, and the town began to reckon with the darkness it had ignored for too long. One evening, after a long day volunteering, Walter and I sat on the porch. The air was cool, and the sky was painted with stars. I leaned into him, feeling grateful for the journey we'd taken, from silence and shame to courage and hope. "I never thought I'd make it this far," I said quietly. He squeezed my hand. "You're stronger than you know, Eloise. And you're not alone." Those words stayed with me, a promise and a beacon. As the weeks passed, I started writing again, this time, not just in secret journals, but in essays and articles for local publications. I wanted to share my story, to give others the strength to speak out. My voice was shaky at first, but with every word, it grew stronger. Looking back, I realized that my journey was never just about surviving, it was about reclaiming my life, my dignity, and my hope. The road ahead was still long, but for the first time in decades, I could see the light at the end of the tunnel. After the dust settled from the trial, life felt like it was slowly trying to find its balance again. But healing, I learned, is never neat or predictable. It's messy, tangled with old fears and new challenges. Some days, I woke up feeling hopeful. Other days, the shadows of the past pressed heavy, threatening to pull me back under. Walter was my anchor through it all. His steady presence reminded me that love could be patient and gentle. He never pushed me to move faster or be stronger than I was. Instead, he held space for my pain and my progress, no matter how small. Our daughters, Emily and Sarah, continued to be my light. Watching them grow into compassionate, brave women made me believe that the cycle of silence and shame could finally end with us. But the wounds ran deep, not just in me, but in my mother too. Gladys was a complicated woman, torn between regret and denial. Our relationship remained fragile, built on cautious steps and tentative conversations. Some days, we shared laughter and memories. Other days, the weight of what was lost hung between us like a thick fog. One morning, I received a letter that shook me to my core. It was from a woman named Rose, a survivor who had read one of my articles about healing after abuse. She wrote about her own pain and the silence that had kept her trapped for decades. Her words were raw and honest, and they reminded me how far-reaching the scars of abuse could be. Rose asked if we could meet. I hesitated at first. Opening old wounds is never easy, but I knew this was part of my journey. Helping others find their voice was becoming my mission. When we met at a quiet cafe, Rose and I shared stories over coffee. Her pain echoed my own, but her hope shone bright. We talked about the power of speaking out and the strength found in community. Inspired by her courage, I decided to start a local support group. It was a small step, but one filled with purpose. Together, we created a safe space for survivors to share, heal, and support each other. The group grew quickly, filled with women and men whose stories touched my heart. Their bravery reminded me that I was not alone, that none of us were. As I stood before the group one evening, sharing my story, I felt a deep sense of peace. The silence that once suffocated me was breaking, replaced by voices united in healing. But healing isn't linear. There were setbacks, moments when the past clawed back, threatening to undo the progress we'd made. One night, I had a nightmare that pulled me back to the darkest days. I woke up trembling, tears streaming down my face. Walter held me close, whispering words of comfort until the fear passed. The next day, I shared the nightmare with the group. Their empathy and understanding helped me move forward, reminding me that vulnerability is strength. Through it all, my family stood by me. Emily and Sarah supported my advocacy work, and Walter never wavered in his love. Together, we were building something new, a future where silence no longer ruled. Looking back, I realized that the journey from victim to survivor is one of courage, patience, and relentless hope. And though the road is long, every step forward is a victory. The seasons turned, and with each passing month, I felt a subtle but steady change within me. The pain of the past remained, but it no longer controlled me. Instead, it became a part of my story, a chapter of survival, not defeat. Walter and I spent quiet evenings on our porch, watching the sun sink below the horizon, sharing memories and hopes. Sometimes, I would tell him about my childhood dreams I'd almost forgotten, of becoming a nurse, of making a difference. And in a way, I was. Not just through my support group or writing, but by simply living. By refusing to let the darkness define me. One afternoon, Emily came to visit with her daughter, my little granddaughter, Lily. Watching Lily's bright eyes and endless curiosity, I was reminded of the innocence that had been stolen from me and so many others. I vowed then to fight even harder for a world where children could grow up safe and loved. My advocacy work took me to places I never expected, speaking at schools, community centers, and even a few small television interviews. Each time, I felt a mix of fear and courage. Sharing my story publicly was terrifying, but it was also liberating. People reached out, survivors, family members, strangers, thanking me for speaking out. Their messages fueled my determination. But not everyone was kind. Some called me a liar, accused me of stirring up trouble, or said I was dredging up the past needlessly. Those words stung, but I learned to let them roll off like rain on a window. What mattered was the lives we were touching, the silences we were breaking. One evening, as I prepared for a talk at a local church, I received a letter from my mother. She wrote that she was proud of me and sorry for the pain she had caused. It was brief, but to me, it was a gift, a fragile bridge across years of distance. I called her, and for the first time in decades, we spoke honestly. It was awkward, tearful, and beautiful all at once. We didn't erase the past, but we began to build a new understanding. My daughters saw the change in me, too. Emily told me she admired my strength and honesty. Sarah said she felt inspired to speak up about her own struggles. Together, we became a family not just bound by blood but by healing and hope. Yet, despite the progress, some days were still hard. Memories would surface unexpectedly, a scent, a song, a place, and I'd feel that old ache. But now, I had tools to cope. I reached out to friends, journaled my feelings, and reminded myself that healing is a journey, not a destination. One of the most powerful moments came when I attended a conference for abuse survivors. Sitting in a room filled with hundreds of people, all sharing their stories, I felt an overwhelming sense of connection. We were warriors, not broken, but battle-scarred and resilient. As I looked around, I realized that my journey was bigger than just me. It was part of a movement toward justice, awareness, and change. And I was proud to be a part of it. The autumn winds were beginning to cool the nights as I settled deeper into my new life, a life I was learning to live on my own terms. The years of silence, shame, and fear were behind me, replaced by purpose and courage. But the path hadn't been easy, and I knew it wouldn't be without new challenges. One morning, I received a call that stirred up a mixture of emotions I wasn't ready to face. It was from the attorney handling James's case. He wanted me to attend the final sentencing hearing. The trial had dragged on for months, with twists and turns that wore us all thin. I told Walter about the call, and he squeezed my hand. "We'll go together," he said. "You don't have to face it alone." The day of the hearing arrived, crisp and clear, the kind of day that carries the weight of finality. Walking into the courtroom, I felt the eyes of the community on me, some filled with sympathy, others with judgment. James sat at the defendant's table, a man decades older, his face lined but his gaze cold and unrepentant. The room was heavy with anticipation as the judge prepared to deliver the sentence. When the gavel fell, James was sentenced to a lengthy prison term. A sense of justice settled over the room, but it was bittersweet. Justice for years of pain, but it could never undo the damage. After the hearing, I stepped outside into the sunlight, breathing deeply. The weight that had pressed on my chest for so long felt lighter. The past was finally being laid to rest. Back home, I found myself reflecting on how much my life had changed. The once scared girl who stood on the edge of that barn roof was now a woman who had fought to reclaim her voice and her dignity. But healing is not just about justice, it's about transformation. About learning to live fully despite the scars. I threw myself into my work with renewed energy. The support group blossomed, becoming a beacon of hope for many. We organized workshops, partnered with local schools to teach children about boundaries and consent, and lobbied for stronger protections for survivors. Emily and Sarah were my proudest accomplishments. Watching them grow into confident, compassionate women reassured me that the cycle of silence and shame was ending. One evening, as we gathered for a family dinner, laughter filled the room, a sound I hadn't heard in years. We toasted to survival, to love, and to the future. But life, with all its beauty, is never without setbacks. A letter arrived from my mother's nursing home. Gladys's health was failing. She wanted to see me. The news stirred old feelings, anger, guilt, sadness, tangled and raw. I debated whether to visit. Could I forgive her fully? Could I face the woman who had once rejected me? With Walter's encouragement, I decided to go. Walking into the sterile room, I found my mother frail and quiet. The woman who had once seemed so unbreakable was now vulnerable. We spoke softly, sharing memories and regrets. She apologized again, tears streaming down her face. In that moment, I realized that forgiveness isn't about forgetting or excusing, it's about freeing yourself from the chains of the past. I held her hand and whispered, "I forgive you, Mom." We spent her last days together, healing what we could. When she passed, I felt a profound mix of grief and peace. Her death marked the closing of a painful chapter and the beginning of true healing. Looking back, I see that life is messy, filled with love and pain, loss and hope. But through it all, we have the power to choose our path. I chose to live, to fight, to love. And that made all the difference. The passing of my mother brought a quiet stillness to my life. The house felt emptier, the days slower, and the weight of years seemed to press down a little heavier. Yet, beneath the sorrow, there was a strange kind of relief that some battles were finally over, and that I could begin to fully claim my own peace. After the funeral, I found myself reflecting on the twists and turns of our fractured relationship. Forgiveness had come slowly, like a fragile sprout breaking through hardened earth. It hadn't erased the past, but it softened its grip. Walter was my steady companion through it all, a constant reminder that love can heal even the deepest wounds. Our daughters, too, were sources of light and strength, reminders of what I had fought for, and what I still hoped for the future. One afternoon, while sorting through some old boxes in the attic, I came across a leather-bound journal. It was my grandmother Matilda's, the woman who had saved me that night so many years ago. The pages were yellowed and brittle, but her handwriting was steady and clear. I began to read. Her words spoke of hardship and hope, of family secrets and forgiveness, of the strength that comes from facing life's darkest moments with courage. She wrote about the importance of breaking silence, that secrets kept in shadows only grow stronger and more dangerous. Reading her journal felt like a conversation across time, a gentle guiding hand leading me forward. Inspired, I decided to compile my own story, not just for me, but for others. A book of pain and healing, of darkness and light. I poured my heart onto the pages, reliving moments I had long tried to forget, but also celebrating the victories that had brought me to where I was now. Writing became a new kind of therapy, a way to weave my fractured pieces into something whole. When I finished, I shared my manuscript with Emily and Sarah. Their tears and smiles told me it was worth it. With their encouragement, I sought a publisher. The process was slow and sometimes discouraging, but I held on to hope. Finally, my book was published, a memoir titled Breaking the Silence, A Journey from Darkness to Light. It was received with warmth and gratitude, touching hearts across the country. Letters poured in from survivors and families, thanking me for giving voice to the pain so many had hidden. One letter, from a young woman named Jessica, stood out. She wrote that reading my book had given her the courage to leave an abusive relationship. Her words reminded me that healing is a ripple effect, one voice can inspire many. As my story reached more people, I found myself invited to speak at conferences, schools, and community events. Standing before audiences, sharing my truth, I felt a powerful connection to others, a shared resilience that transcended pain. But with visibility came vulnerability. Some days, the memories would hit like waves, threatening to pull me under. I learned to lean into my support network, to practice self-care, and to remind myself that strength isn't about never falling, but about rising each time. Through it all, my family remained my anchor. Walter's love was steady and unwavering. Emily and Sarah's pride and support filled me with joy. Together, we had turned a legacy of silence into one of hope. As I look back now, I see that my journey was never just about surviving trauma, it was about reclaiming my life and helping others do the same. And that is a gift I will carry with me always. The morning sunlight streamed gently through the curtains as I sat quietly by the window, reflecting on the long journey that had brought me here. It felt like a lifetime ago, the scared little girl on the porch swing, the broken teenager standing on the barn roof, ready to give up on life. And yet, here I was, a grandmother, a survivor, a woman who had found light in the deepest darkness. The years had taught me that healing is not a destination but a continuous journey, one that requires courage, forgiveness, and above all, love. In the years since my mother's passing and James's conviction, my life had blossomed in ways I never imagined possible. My book, Breaking the Silence, had reached thousands, becoming a beacon of hope for survivors and their families. I had traveled across states, sharing my story, speaking to crowds big and small, reminding people that no one is ever alone. Emily and Sarah were thriving, both had chosen careers dedicated to helping others, inspired by the struggles we had faced together. Watching them care for their own children with gentleness and respect brought me peace I had never known. Walter and I often sat in the garden, surrounded by the flowers we'd planted together, a living symbol of growth and renewal. His hand in mine, steady and reassuring, reminded me that love, when nurtured, can heal even the deepest wounds. One autumn afternoon, as leaves swirled outside the window, I received a letter that filled me with a mixture of gratitude and humility. It was from a young woman named Jessica, the one who had told me my book gave her the strength to escape abuse. She wrote of her newfound freedom, her healing, and her hope for the future. Her words were a powerful reminder that our stories matter, that sharing our pain can spark light in the lives of others. I closed the letter and smiled. My journey, once filled with silence and shame, had become a beacon of hope. I thought back to Grandma Matilda, the woman who had saved me all those years ago with her quiet strength and unwavering love. I hoped I had lived up to her legacy. That night, as I settled into bed, I felt a deep sense of peace wash over me. The scars of my past would always be a part of me, but they no longer defined me. I was free. Free to love, to laugh, to live fully. And most importantly, free to help others find their own light. Because no matter how dark the night, the dawn always comes. If Eloise's story moved you, please hit the like button and share this video to raise awareness about the realities of abuse and the power of healing. Subscribe for more true emotional stories that inspire courage and hope. Have you or someone you love overcome trauma? Share your story in the comments below. Your voice matters and can help others feel less alone.